Aloha! So I lived on the Hawaiian island of Maui for a couple years from 2009 to 2011. Since I've decided to kind of re-up my channel and put together videos about adventuring and travel and stuff like that I enjoy doing, I've decided to go back and put together some retrospectives just with old photos that I used to take back in the day before I had a good video camera to document this stuff more good. So please excuse the photo slideshow format, but that's just what I have from the time. So for this video I'm talking about adventure hikes, and by that I mean hikes that are just a little bit more involved, more challenging than just a simple, walk through the woods. Of course the islands are chock full of all sorts of adventures and hikes that I definitely would have sought out or discovered had I stayed there longer, but this is just what I have from the time that I was there. I also want to point out that the music in this video is by one of my favorite bands from the islands back at the time. They're called the Throwdowns, and they were an awesome fusion of reggae and rock and funk and punk, and they were kind of dominating the music scene at the time. They've since broken up and gone their separate ways, but I'll put some links below to places you can discover more of their music. So mahalo for checking this out, and let's get going. By far, the hike I did the most and would bring my mainland visitors to give them a taste of how incredible the islands are was what is locally known as the bamboo hike. This isn't to be confused with the waterfall hike, which is much further along the Hana Highway, and though that one begins with an even larger and more imposing bamboo forest, it's a much shorter and easier hike that ends at a several hundred-foot waterfall in Haleakala National Park. The bamboo hike, on the other hand, is more on the island's north shore proper, though still along the Hana Highway. I didn't know until I just looked it up, but as you can see, the hike is apparently officially closed, which is a real shame. So the hike starts by parking along the side of the road and walking into a vast bamboo forest. I've never seen anything like it, and the first time I did this hike, I couldn't get over how otherworldly it felt, at least for a suburban East Coast mainland kid like me. The trail leads you down to a riverbed where we had to jump across rocks to zigzag back and forth over the river, which you follow for a while. This is my dad and my brother, who were kind enough to document this particular trip for us. Along the way there are ridges that are too tall and are too slippery to climb unassisted, so over time people had installed ropes, planks, and rope ladders to help. The river path eventually ends at a pond. Some people choose to turn back at this point, but I was lucky enough to be told early on that if you jump in and swim, there's a couple of jungle waterfalls ahead. The first one can be climbed, which leads to another pond, and the waterfall at the other side of this one can also be climbed for all the cliff jumping our hearts desired. Alright, this next one, the also locally dubbed Commando hike, I only had the privilege of doing once, and since we weren't able to bring a camera with us, these photos are going to be just what I was able to find on the internet. However, I wanted to at least document my own experience with this mind-blowing hike the best I could, and I would definitely be remiss to leave it out because I didn't have any photos or footage of it. The Commando hike is along the same river as the bamboo hike, I believe, so the trailhead is nearby. But this one requires you to cross a swath of cattle farmland guarded by some very intimidating bulls. We avoided eye contact and nimbly made our way along the riverbed. This one started much like the bamboo hike with a lot of rock traversing, but with the added fun of having to climb and swing through these thick, low-hanging jungle vines. I can't deny that I felt a lot like a monkey or Indiana Jones with a monkey, or that scene in Crystal Skull with Shia LaBeouf that I wish I could forget. This led us to a crevasse, I don't know the difference, in a rock wall, which, if I hadn't had my then bandmates with me, I don't think any of us could have made it up to the top alone. There was water running down it, it was super slippery, and we needed to assist each other up. So following the river some more, we came upon a lava tube opening, like the mouth of Mother Earth ready to swallow us whole. But of course, we went right into the pitch black abyss, waist deep in opaque black water. Good thing we had headlamps. At the other end of the lava tube cave was a wet rock face that we had to precariously and carefully make our way to the top of, which led to a sort of concrete drainage slab that we had to almost crawl along, it was so low. Once out of the lava tube, we came upon a series of cliff jumps. If I remember correctly, the first was about 25 to 30 feet, the second one was maybe only 15 to 20, but the last was allegedly, from what I was told, about 60 feet high. It took all of us more than a few seconds to muster the courage to take that leap. Unfortunately, I couldn't find any photos of the final part of the hike, but it's really just following the riverbed back down to the trailhead. I do remember, though, that the river was so shallow and rocky that it was actually easier to kind of crawl along the rocks on my belly and hands instead of walking on them and constantly slipping with my feet. So we looked really weird, but we made it back. Now, though the Haleakala crater hike doesn't involve the same kind of like rock climbing and cliff jumping adventure stuff as the last two did, the immense grandeur and variety of extreme terrains definitely makes it an adventure hike in my book. Not to mention the elevation adding to the temperamental and sometimes completely spontaneous intense weather, which is what I experienced the first time I visited expecting to hike there. Luckily, several months later when I tried again, the weather was absolutely gorgeous. So this hike starts at 10,023 feet above sea level at the dormant Haleakala volcano summit. There are trails all throughout the crater and surrounding areas, but the one I specifically did was the, and forgive me if I butcher the pronunciation, the Waihe'e sliding sands trail that starts at the visitor center and leads down into the crater. The crater is a stunningly stark and vast mixture of lava rock, sand, and sparse desert-like flora, some of which only grows on the islands, such as the mysterious silver sword. If I remember correctly, the first part of the hike down into the crater is a few miles, and the trail across to the other side is about half a dozen miles or so. The following photos are just some highlights of what I saw along the way. This is one of the cabins that you can rent, so you can spend multiple days hiking the crater if you want. From what I hear, you have to book way in advance though. Once you get to the other side of the crater on the sliding sands trail, you have to hike a few miles back up the crater wall along a series of switchbacks. I was sore for days and days after this hike. It's not just the length, which I believe was around 12 miles total, but walking downwards for a few miles, hiking through miles and miles of sandy terrain and then back up, really made this one of the most physically trying hikes I've ever done. I wouldn't necessarily categorize this next one as an adventure hike like the others, because the Waihe'e Ridge Trail is more of a standard walking hike, but it's the only other one I have photos of, and the views were so spectacular that I just really couldn't pass up mentioning it. It's on the northern side of the island, on the east side of the West Maui Mountains. The trailhead starts in the woods at a lower elevation, and the hike is pretty much straight up from there. Really unique trees and foliage along the way, and when we emerged from the forest, the views of the north shore of the island were just jaw-dropping, both of the shore and the valleys below. Yeah.